Hello, welcome to the first episode of Season 3 of Bangkok Thought Leaders. Here we are in Lexicon's beautiful new studio. For the first episode, we have a very, very special guest. We have Dr. Larry Persons here with us today. So Larry is one of Bangkok's true thought leaders and also an inspiration to me personally. Last year, I was fortunate enough to come across his book, The Way Thais Lead, which is just right here. I read this book page to page, and it changed my vision of how to be a leader in Thailand. All sorts of great insights into things that you'd never imagined before, but you see every day. So as an expat leader especially, I strongly recommend you to read this book. But even if you're a Thai leader, there's lots of insights for you on how you lead too. Around Christmas time, Larry got me a kind gift of the Netflix book, No Rules Rules, which is one of the things that I'd love to discuss with him today. The book, again, as Larry's book had done earlier in the year, changed my whole perception of management and leadership. We're at Lexicon now 48 staff, and increasingly I'm feeling that we need more and more rules in order to avoid problems, to avoid issues coming. The more structure we have, the more process we have, the better things are going to be. However, the Netflix book suggests the opposite to be true. Rather than more rules, we should have less rules. It seems counterintuitive, but it's working for Netflix. So, Dr. Persons, what do you make of the book?
I think it's very, very insightful on many accounts. I love that it's sort of an earthquake, especially in any hierarchical setting, like most of the settings here in Thailand. It runs in the face of many of the things I've written about in my research, which is always a challenge. And that's probably something we can talk about here today in specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that the two books are companion pieces, that they're completely opposite in their approach to understanding how culture works. But I think the Netflix culture inside Thailand could never work in its present form. It requires your concepts to interface with it. As I mentioned already, for us, the reading of both books was a revelation. It's inspired us as a company to change the way we see the future. We're now looking to genuinely create a culture of excellence that's lending from both sets of ideas. Like, how do we embrace Thai culture while also embracing Netflix culture? This is a conundrum that I think the whole world or the whole country is going to be facing over the next 5 to 10 years. I think the generational shift is happening right now. And one of the key concepts in the book that I think is especially going to be difficult is the concept of sunshining. That's sunshining, right?
Yes,
okay.
sunshining.
Sunshining. So sunshining is that the CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings, talks about when he makes bad decisions or when he makes mistakes, he doesn't hide away from them. He will call a meeting of the whole company and he will explain, here's the logic I was trying to go through, here's the decision I made, terrible mistake, but we can all learn from it. So we're learning from our mistakes, we're growing, we're getting better. How do you feel that concept would work here in Thailand?
Wow, that's going to be a very difficult sell in most Thai circles, in most Thai organizations. Very difficult sell. It flies in the face of face rules. You know, everybody is raksa na. They're going to protect their own face. It's like a treasure that you need to protect. Mm. And I think the idea that a leader makes a mistake and admits to the mistake is a loss of face on the part of the leader. And until certain companies and leaders can get over that and move beyond that and model something new, it's going to be a very difficult sell.
Is a leader expected to be perfect in Thailand?
Pretty much. I think so.
On both sides?
Yeah.
So the employees expect perfection and the person themselves?
I think everybody knows no one's perfect, but it doesn't keep everybody from pretending that they're perfect and not owning up to their mistakes. See, in face work, which is what we do, we're doing face right now, but in face work, the whole idea is you have front stage behaviors. Irving Goffman, 60 years ago. Front stage behaviors and backstage behaviors.
Presentation of self in everyday life.
Yes, very good. And so this self-presentation or this tweaking of images, you know, we're doing it all day long, all of us, not just Thais. I mean, all of us are doing that. But the whole idea with Thai face work is that you've got this front stage behavior that you're focusing on, and there's just an awful lot hidden in backstage. So this idea of transparency as it's described in the book, I mean, it's just going to sound initially unacceptable for most traditional Thai leaders.
Yeah, I think some people may wonder why I'm talking about corporate culture as a marketing person, but I think all of these worlds connect together. Sociology, social science, cultural studies. Even in the book you mentioned, persona is face, right? It's literally the word person comes from face. So a leader's persona is essential to their parami, their stature, their position in society, and the favors they can borrow. I think as an expat leader, I'm able to kind of navigate around those things more easily than a Thai leader could. But what do you think the reaction would be if a Thai leader was to suddenly every Monday morning start announcing all the things they'd failed? Do you think that would rally the troops, or would it create a mutiny?
Yeah, it's a good question. It depends on who the troops are, I think. And again, if we're going to change microcultures of, let's say, starting with smaller companies, and to change the microculture, then you're going to need to recruit the right people. I've said it to you before. I mean, you're going to have to recruit outliers from Thai society, and that doesn't necessarily mean just all young people either, because even amongst them there's such a drastic difference. But you got to recruit people who are not dutiful, who are willing to speak up, who are willing to challenge, and so that would help. If the troops were like that, they would probably have a celebration if their leader actually said it like it was.
That brings on to another topic from the book, which is that of talent density. So there's a great example early in the book where it talks, Reed Hastings said that, so Netflix was in its early days, they'd lost some funding and they had to cut 25% of their staff. So it was an arduous, difficult decision to make, but they found a process where they identified the lowest 25% of performers who they thought were part of the family, they didn't want to let them go. And they thought that once they made these redundancies, that productivity would drop, morale would drop, and the company would maybe not even survive. Yeah. The results were counterintuitive. The performances of their team went up, their productivity went up, but they became a better team, they became more successful than ever. So that talent density concept, which you mentioned, is really important, because if you have a team of people all operating at a high level without these additional complicated cultural elements, you're gonna get better performance. But that idea of rewarding based on merit, I guess, more than anything, again, it's counterintuitive to Thai culture. How is Thailand going to get to a point where they could, if I was to fire 25% of the Lexicon team, there would definitely be a mutiny. People would revolt. How does Thailand get to a place where they can have that outliers, as you said?
Right. I don't know. The key point on talent density, what came to my mind when I was reading that, is that it does fly in the face of another model for most Thai companies. Most Thai companies are based on the family model. That's the metaphor. We're one big family. And I mean, there are people, for instance, many Chinese companies, they've got someone an uncle who's been working there for years and years and years, and even after he can't do anything, they still retain him. And they really squirm at mass firings and all. But the idea of talent density is that you're willing to give up 3 or 4 average people if you can hire a rock star.
Yep.
And that seems like you're not supposed to be able to kick people out of the family, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
So that they would literally have to, any company would have to shift their thinking, I think, to say, no, we're more like a professional sports team, which is what they talk about.
Yeah, it's a powerful metaphor, because again, I think of Lexicon as a family. We struggle together, we go through things together, we succeed together. But the idea that, a sports team, as you said, it's about who's performing best. Like, we need gold medal winners. If the game changes or the tactics change, we might need to replace that. It definitely flies in the face of the Thai familial culture, but it also leads to another point from the book, which is about candor and honesty and giving feedback. It's something I try to do, but even as a direct speaking Westerner. It's a difficult trait to embody. Now in the book, Reed Hastings, the CEO, talks about how they encourage the whole company to give feedback constantly to each other, to give, in the acting world it would be notes, do this better, and it's genuinely benevolent. It's not in any way malicious. It's, hey, I've seen how you're doing this, maybe you want to consider doing it this way. They talk about their 360-degree feedback sessions being literally a table of people saying, for the good of the company, I think you need to be doing this differently, or I didn't like the way you approached that situation, perhaps you could do it a different way. That is, and that's not even in Thai culture, I think, just as a cultural business move, a revelation, a revolution. Like, where are we in Thailand as far as introducing such a direct candor feedback situation?
That's a real uphill journey, I'll tell you, because somewhere along the way, and I don't claim to have mastered why, it's really, really hard, as we talked, for leaders to sunshine, which is candor, saying, look, I screwed up, I want everybody to know. But the idea of giving negative feedback is just anathema. It really, really hurts. Many, many times it really, really hurts ties, person after person. And the whole idea of it is that, I don't know, but the concept is, look, if I'm doing bad, you don't have to tell me. And this is completely opposite that. I mean, it's the idea that I'm going to just say, they had the point where someone several levels down in a meeting interrupted the CEO and said, I think you're wrong and you're going in the right. You're not going to see that in the average institution here in Thailand. But maybe one thing we should do, David, is just to delimit a little bit here, because it's not, a book comes out and people get all excited about it, right? And they say, oh, well, here's the new model. It's going to take you like a skyrocket up. It's the new fad or whatever. But even in the book, they delimit it. And they say, first of all, it's not for the operations side of any business. It's for the creative sides.
Absolutely.
The whole idea is, if you want to be really innovative, really agile, really creative, then here are some principles that really have worked for us. The problem is, and this is a much deeper discussion and thought piece, and that is, the problem is it does fly in the face of Thai culture in major ways. Yeah, so this idea of giving someone negative feedback, it stings, it hurts. So yeah, it's a tough one.
Why do you think that is, the negative feedback? Because as long as I've always appreciated constructive feedback, even if it was not positive, it's towards making you a better person. Why do you think there is that? Is it a face issue in Thai culture, or is there often or sometimes a malicious intent behind that feedback, even if is it received negatively, even if it's presented positively?
When I figure out, I'll tell you. I don't have an answer to that yet. But remember, it's a culture where authority figures, father and mother, almost never apologize. It's a culture in which leaders almost never apologize. And so now everybody knows and they have criticism of them, but it creates, that's the prototype. That's the prototype where they feel their comfort zone is, look, let's not be critical of one another. Let's not hurt someone's feelings. Because if you say something like that, a key point is you're going to destroy group harmony. If that person lost face, everybody else feels uncomfortable too. And so it's again, I'm sounding like a naysayer on all this stuff, and I'm really not, because I'm going to dig deeper on some of these things, and I think there are ways to adapt. But let's admit, this is, I just looked at the culture map for the company of Netflix, and Thailand's way on the far right side on everything. And so anybody, if you haven't read the book, The Culture Map, Aaron Meyer's book, my comment won't make sense to you right now, but the idea is mapping cultures on these scales of, how confrontive are they? What are they, top down, or are they consensual leadership? What's their view of time? How do they build trust? And on every one of these issues, Thailand's way over on the other side. And you can't just pretend that gap doesn't exist.
I think there's a really instructive example in the book based on the culture map model you just mentioned, where obviously Japan is nearer to Thailand in its cultural map than most places in the world would be. Very high context culture, very face saving, very indirect. I think they give a great example in the book of how they were able to bridge both worlds. So you have that 360-degree feedback situation, which is the opposite of how both Thai and Japanese culture would operate. And they tried to do it in the Japanese Netflix office, and it completely failed because people just couldn't get to the point where they were able to just off the cuff say, hey, here's what I don't like about you, or here's what you need to do differently. Their solution was to make it homework, essentially. Like, you must submit this feedback, you've got a week to prepare it, and then you must deliver it to the person's face. Then it was an order from above, it was an instruction, and it kind of rewired the cultural context a little bit. So I think the key is here really, and not to give you too much credit for this slide, but you deserve it. People are going to need you to bridge this gap. They're going to need you to figure out what are these innovative solutions that can allow you to have this really agile, future-facing, creative corporate culture in a society which isn't necessarily hardwired to be that way.
Right.
Like, obviously, we all know Thailand is full of brilliant people, full of smart people, full of creative people, chomping at the bit to get ahead, but it's often these hierarchical cultural mainstays of society that are limiting their development. And I think we're gonna get onto that in a moment, but I think it's probably a neat segue from here, the Thai Values 4.0 question. So I know we were going to discuss that a bit later, but it is a perfect segue there, that Thailand has grand ambitions to be a major, at least regional, potentially global player. And they have great natural resources, great universities, talented people. They've got everything materially they could possibly need to compete against first world countries. Why can't they?
Well, I don't know if they would admit that they can't.
Okay. Okay. In my opinion, they might not be able to.
Laksana. Why? This is my suspicion that change is coming faster and faster, and it's coming upon us, so we cannot ignore it. COVID was a wake-up call, but we still got sleeping people, and it means we're all going to have to get more agile. In many, many industries, many, many businesses, we're going to have to get more agile, and yet there are still people that have not woken up to that fact. What was your question?
So the word agile especially, I think, is super relevant. So obviously Japanese culture and Thai culture, they have a lot in common in that regard, that they're both very high context, they're both very indirect, and I think if someone's looking to implement the Netflix book here in Thailand, or to develop a culture like that, which is agile and quick thinking and able to react to that multiple levels of sign-off in Thailand essentially without you and your book and your insights, it's going to be impossible. Why do you think it is that Thailand is not yet ready to become, okay, maybe it's not, maybe that's wrong framing, but Thailand's government is pushing for this Thailand 4.0 initiative, where they're going to be a global player. And in every objective sense, they're able to be. I believe they have great natural resources, they have great universities, they've got good infrastructure, they have pretty much everything that they need to compete. But they seem unable to compete even against their neighbors, let alone against first world countries. What are some of the more subjective cultural elements that you think might impede that ability to become Thailand 4.0?
Right. My thought was, since last year I've been thinking about this, and I heard about Thailand 4.0. Frankly, I went to some Chamber of Commerce events, and I asked people about it, and they all acted like it was sort of pie in the sky. It doesn't have any real impact and meaning, you know. And so I started thinking about that, and one of the things that came to me, particularly after I read this book, is that the reason you can't just say, okay, we want to be like this. You got to say, who are you first? And who you are and your basic values. There's so many good and beautiful things about Thai culture, but there are certain things that are going to keep you from being players on that scene. And a lot of it is the face rules here of society. In order to become competitive, they're going to have to think about Thai Values 4.0. They're going to have to think about what things are getting in the way. If you don't talk about what's getting in the way, then you're never going to get there. And that's got to be an honest and open conversation.
So what are some of those obstacles? What are some of the specific things that you think might be getting in the way of allowing Thailand to move quickly and respond in an agile way to some of the competitive challenges of the regional rivals?
Right. One is the kreng chai, the idea that I'm just overly humble about things, not being sure if I should speak up in this more global scene, gaining voice. That's one, and that's a very deep one with many tentacles that go down. Kreng chai would be one. The other is avoidance of confrontation. I think they're going to have to get beyond this. The younger generation is going to have to get beyond this to be truly competitive on the global scene. So because every time it's with a premise, well, why don't you want to confront? Oh, because it'll destroy the harmony in this group. Okay, so what they need to say is, okay, it may destroy harmony as you define it, but what will you gain by actually doing that? And they never go there because of the fear of what they will lose. So they've got to wake up to what they will gain by courageously conquering some of those fears.
You give some great examples in the Netflix book about how by empowering individual leaders to make decisions, they're able to beat bigger rivals. For some companies, you would need, I think they mentioned Disney perhaps as an example, where the head of a department would need the sign-off of his head of department, who for anything over a certain amount of money needs the CFO and the CEO and the COO to make a decision. And by that point, someone else is already, a more agile company that can make decisions more quickly has already taken it. I guess that's probably going to be an impediment here, where I can only imagine what the government is like, but a minister, are they really empowered to take decisions on behalf of the country, or is there going to be the boon kun that you mentioned in your book, where they have to think about who they owe favors to, and they're making a deal, they can't make this deal because the predecessor 3 generations ago made a different deal and they might lose face and they owe them a favor? Is that kind of thing, do you think?
Your comments are completely legitimate, because that is in the whole atmosphere. I think that it's not as clean. I mean, you can't just pick these principles up and just say, well, let's just do it, And you certainly can't turn to a Thai company and say, oh, you want to, just do it, just start doing these things. I really think it takes a gut check first. They need to figure out who they are. I teach at SO3EO in one course on cultural intelligence, and one of the textbooks is my book, and most of the students are Thais. Well, why are they reading my book? They're Thais. They know all this stuff, don't they? Guess what? They don't. They don't know all this stuff. And so one of the first goals is building self-awareness, so Thais understand how it really works and what makes it tick for them. This self-awareness is a big key piece for a launch pad into what would be Thailand 4.0.
So you think many of these behaviors are reflexive rather than reflective? The decisions are made without really understanding the context?
Oh yes.
Wow.
Very much so.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow, that's big. That's big. So obviously we've spoken about the things that need to be improved. What's the roadmap here? How does Thailand move forward? Where do we go from here? How do we get to a culture 10 years from now that is able to compete against even Malaysia and Singapore and Vietnam? How do we move forward?
First of all, there can be no one savior to lead us, there. I think it's going to be a team effort of those who really get it and understand that things have to change. And how much, how little, in what areas, that still means it's a journey. We still need to, but I am absolutely convinced that Thailand 4.0 is either going to be a weak echo of what they hope it will be, or it's not, we'll never get there unless we look at Thai values 4.0.
It seems the younger generation coming through now, I've been here 17 years and you've been here a fair few years more than that. The younger generation now seems to be less tied to those values almost. I'm not sure if this is every single 22-year-old is like that and then they become more conservative as they get older, or if this is genuinely the precipice of something different. What are your thoughts on that?
I wish I had the research, because I am a researcher. I don't have the research there. I have a lot of anecdotal stories that suggest that there is a real revolution happening, that they're eager, they're ready for change. And I would say that you remember being young, right? I barely do, but you know, when you're young, you think you're going to change the world and everything, and that youthful vigor and enthusiasm and passion is intoxicating. And to tap into that, that's what I think is important. Like one of the things I ask younger Thais, you are the leaders of tomorrow. What kind of leader are you going to be? You have a choice. And I really talk about the bottom-me model of leadership, because the bottom-me model of leadership is a win-win situation for everybody, for everyone. It's longevity in leadership, but it's a win-win for the follower as well. It's the most empowering paradigm of power in Thai society.
Not everybody's going to know the bottom-me model of leadership.
Okay.
And it's virtuous leadership, but could you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, virtuous leadership, it's the bottom-me leader is someone who has parked his ego. And he uses resources for the benefit of society at large. And I'm not just talking about big donors. I'm talking about maybe even small, maybe somebody running a shop house or something like that. But the style is that they are not looking to dominate, increase the gap between them and their followers and to become greater and greater. What they're learning, what they're wanting to do is to empower them. Literally, the bottom-me leader is not as threatened as the other two prototypes, which is I'm not, or authority leader who has hierarchy and everything, or the influencer, itipon model. But those two will be more careful to guard their treasures, you know, of their leadership and their saksi and who they are and their you know, public acclaim and everything else. Bottom-me leader, that's not the focus. The focus is, and this is what I love, that power is a gift to be used virtuously for the benefit of others. And when we do that, we benefit as well. Maybe not in ways that others do when they cut corners, etc., but we benefit as well. But look at how we empower other people when they're that way. And a true bottom-me leader has true devotion, you know, in the hearts of the people that follow him.
Okay, so Thailand 4.0 powered by bottom-me is the way to go.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a huge fan of it. And that's why I argue that bottom-me is a lifestyle. It's not some auspicious sense of something that settles, you know, according to astrology on somebody. It's not, you know, who's your daddy. It's none of those things. Bottom-me is a much different sense.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Larry. You've taken up too much of your valuable time already, but I've learned a lot from this. I think that genuinely, if anyone can bridge these two worlds, it's you. The Netflix book has so many great ideas, and your book has so many great ideas. I think if any company is looking to genuinely create that agile culture here on the ground, you're definitely the person to speak to. So
thank you, David.
Whether you are looking to revolutionize your company culture, whether you're looking for somebody to help develop cross-cultural intelligence within your company, or whether you're looking for a cultural coach or guide, I think all of those things, I'd highly recommend Dr. Persons. And Larry, if they're looking to get hold of you, how do they do that?
First of all, please connect on LinkedIn. That would be great. And then we are at leadwithcq.com. Take a look at our website as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, David. Yeah, great to be with you.